Hey, how you doing?
Nice meeting you, sir. Mr. Banks.
I'm Justin.
Nice meeting you, Justin.
Okay, we can ask you a couple questions about minimum wage.
Sure.
Do you think minimum wage is good or bad?
Well, minimum wage is a good thing. Now, I would say it's bad, but let me explain the paradox. It's bad that government has to impose certain wages. One would hope that employers will pay people what they need to live. It's good, however, that the government recognizes that employers are not going to do the right thing, and therefore they impose the minimum wage that employers must pay workers. We have to live. And therefore, since some people don't care whether you live or not, as you know, we had slavery in America. Some people will work you practically for free. So it's good that the government imposed minimum wages as to what employers should pay employees.
If you could, what price would you place the minimum wage?
Well, you know, when you start talking minimum wage, you must understand that the NBA has a minimum wage. Okay, there's a minimum contract in the NBA. So it's kind of difficult to establish an artificial minimum wage because obviously it doesn't take long for a person to know how to flip a hamburger. But there are some industries where people's skills are such that they require or deserve a higher wage than somebody flipping a burger. So you can't say exactly what a minimum wage should be. But since we do want some kind of bottom line idea of what a wage should be, then you might establish, let's say, a $12 an hour minimum wage for dishwashers. Since we recognize some businesses may have low skilled employees, so you might say, well, your skill only requires $12 an hour. But every industry must assess what it feels is a fair minimum wage, purposely because some skills are required higher than others in every industry.
Do you think minimum wage is overrated?
Well, their wages will always go up because inflation will always go up. Inflation means prices are always going to rise. And therefore, Dr. King and others marched in 1963 trying to get the minimum wage raised to $2 an hour. $2 an hour. Well, today, $2 an hour in 63 is comparable to $13 an hour today. And as you know, minimum wage is about $7.25. So wages will always rise because prices are going to rise. And the government must compel employers to raise their wages in order to try to help their workers be able to purchase more. What good is my making $10 an hour if it costs me $10 to buy a Big Mac, which would be the case in 10, 15 years from now. You know, when I was your age, a gallon of gasoline cost 33 cents a gallon. So prices are constantly going up. So my wages must rise to offset rising prices. So minimum wage will always rise. The paramount issue is my wages going up to offset the rise in prices.
How do you think bosses will react to the way Obama's trying to do?
You said voters?
Obama trying to see it.
You asked me how do I believe voters will react? Well, voters are not a monolithic group. You got some voters who are conservative, some voters who are liberal. You got Democrats, you have Republicans. People who support the Democratic ticket recognizes that workers have a right to profit from the corporation. If you're working for a corporation, it makes sense that you ought to be able to live if you perform the work. There are Republicans, conservatives, who act as if corporations are only there for the shareholders and the owners. Therefore, as far as they're concerned, we only should pay you what we have to, and everything else should flow to the people who own the corporation, the stockholders. So it all depends on who you ask. If you ask me, I believe that you should pay people a legitimate raise. Why should a CEO make $100 million a year, and then the employees are barely making enough to live? They got to have 2 or 3 jobs. I don't think that disparity is necessary. I think you can pay the CEO good money, but at the same time, Ray, you can pay the CEO good money, but lower his compensation package, and also give your workers more money in order to help them live.
Do you think some jobs will be closed to start laying people out?
That's the fear tactic and the scare tactic Republicans always use. If we raise the minimum wage, we're not going to have to lay people off because, you know, they do that anytime they start talking about increasing wages or insurance, things of that nature. One of the Republican scare tactics is we're going to have to lay people off. The bottom line is, if you are a profitable corporation, if you raise wages, that price increase is going to be off. When you give your employee a higher raise, they're just gonna charge higher prices for their products. It's gonna be passed along to consumers. That's what we call inflation. So don't ever let them dupe you into believing that somehow we're gonna lay people off. No, you're not, because if you pay your workers more, in fact, the corporation may make more money. Why? Because there's more money in circulation. If you give the people more money to spend, they're gonna have more money to buy, which is gonna stimulate the economy. When you buy from FedEx, FedEx is gonna buy from AutoZone, AutoZone is gonna buy from Kroger. Everybody's spending more money, that means more business for you. And so whatever you spend is gonna come back to you in higher revenue.
How do you think this would affect teenagers?
How is it gonna affect teenagers? Well, it's gonna affect teenagers for the most part. Obviously, teenagers typically gonna work at fast foods, restaurants, and businesses like that. So it's gonna help